you hear means that you actually believe this this story about the being thin on the ground because it's bank holiday weekend and there's camp? No, don't you believe it? You know, this week is exam week. That's why people haven't turned up. You know, they got wind of it. Can you just imagine that, you know, I give you a sheet of paper now. You know, some of the young ones are probably doing exams. At the moment, we've got a list of the young people in our church and what exams they're taking on each day. GCSEs seem relentless at the moment. You know, every day they seem to be taking exams. But what if I give you a blank piece of paper and my question is, what have you learned? Now, you come to church every week. You know, you hear someone preach. You read the Bible. But what have you learned? Can I spread it a bit and ask you, what have you learned that's made a difference? Have you heard things at church that you've taken them, you put them into action, they've become part of your life? So the question I really want to ask you this morning is, what have you learned from Jesus? What have you learned from Jesus? Jesus says, come to me. Isn't that delightful? You know, that he would say, come to me. When I was at primary school, well, I think they might have called it infant school. When you first begin at school, there was a picture on the wall, and it was a picture of Jesus, and he had a load of children round him. There was a blonde, blue-eyed girl sitting on his knee, you know. There were people of different colours round him. I did notice that the more sort of less white you were, you seemed to be towards the outside of the group. I can remember noticing that as a 5-year-old. But you know what I wanted to? I wanted to be there. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be next to Jesus. I thought it must be amazing. You know, and I wasn't going to get there for a long time, you know. I didn't realise that, you know, he said, come and you can come to him. You know, I was in my teens before that was explained to me, and I come to him. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That phrase, learn from me. Learn from me. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. This yoke thing is a great big wooden thing with two great scoops out of it, and it's been made to fit over the backs of two animals, usually oxen, and they've got this on the lower part of their neck. It allows them to pull the load they're attached to with the muscles that are in there, you know, the main muscles they've got, you know, and not sort of be under strain. And what you would do if you were a farmer and you were taking your oxen out, and you had a young oxen that didn't know quite what to do, you'd put your older oxen that knew the ropes and knew what to do, and you'd put the young one next to him, and they'd be yoked together, and off they go down the field. And when the younger one, the less experienced, started to not do it quite right, not walk the right way, not keep it straight, the older one would just push him into line, you know, and they'd go along, and the younger one would learn from the older one. You know, learn from me. Jesus is saying, learn from me. Come and be yoked with me. Come and be together with me. And as we go, let's, you know, learn from me. My first job was in a grocer's shop. And the way of education was that as a 15-year-old lad, I was put with this 63-year-old man. And we worked in the back room of the shop. And he taught me things. And the way he taught me things was he did them and I watched. And then I did them. And so he taught me how to bag up bags of sugar and how to do it so the sugar wouldn't come out. He eventually taught me to bone bacon, to get half a bacon and half a pig and take all the bones out without ruining the bacon, so that when the customers got their slice of bacon, it wasn't all tattered and torn. It looked really nice and round and smooth. And he taught me little tricks of the trade, and I watched him and he did it. Now, it's not learning from someone older, not someone wiser. It's learning from Jesus. It's learning from the King of Glory. It's learning from him. You notice it doesn't say, learn about me. It doesn't say, come and learn about me. It says, learn from me. It's implying that we need to be imitating him. We need to be doing it his way, not our way. Now, I thought hard about how in my life I've learned about Jesus to the extent where I learn from Jesus. And I have to admit, it's got to involve the Bible. Certainly in my experience, it's got to involve the Bible. It's either someone telling me about the life of Jesus, what it says in the Bible, or it's me reading it. Now, I don't know. I look out. I have no idea who really is in front of me. So, when I was a teenager, if someone had stood at the front of church and said this, not that I'd have been in church, by the way, but if someone had said it, I'd have just gone click and switched off because I couldn't read. I didn't really learn to read until I became a Christian when I was 17, and that's when I started to read. And it's terribly difficult if you can't read. I have a friend, Kevin, he's a traveller, we used to call them gypsies, but that name is a bit derogatory these days. But Kevin's got his own business. He's a builder. He's very successful, but he can't read or write. His wife does all his admin for him, but he went to church. He was invited to church, and he trusted in Jesus. But there was a lady in the church that realised that Kevin couldn't read. And so one week when Kevin turned up, she gave him a box, and in the box was a lot, and you can tell this is not a recent story, was a load of CDs with the Bible on, so he could play them. And in his car, he had a CD player, and he could play them in his van and that. And he started to listen to the gospel. But the lady did more than that. She said to Kevin, if you really want to, if you come to my house, I'll teach you to read. And so today Kevin can read, and he can read the Bible, which is absolutely amazing. But it could be hard for you, but there's a way around it today. Today, we can download onto our phone the Bible that at a push of a button it'll read to us. It's incredible. And if you need that sort of, help, you need to just ask someone. I love having the Bible on my phone that I can just go to and press a couple of buttons, and there it is, and it's being read to me, and I don't have to worry about the long names and big words and anything. When I was in my 20s, I was really privileged to go to Bible college. It was in Glasgow, and the first assignment, shall we say, that we were given was to read Mark's Gospel and find out what we could discover from Mark's gospel about the humanity and the deity of Jesus. And then we had to write it up, of course, because college, isn't it? So you always end up writing. But I can remember, you see, I didn't know the Bible very well before I went to Bible college. I didn't come from a Christian family or a Christian background. It started late on the learning thing, but I loved, just going through. But you see, it's not just learning about Jesus. It's learning from Jesus. There's a verse in the Bible, some of you might know it off by heart. It's in the book of James, chapter 1 and verse 22, and it says, "Don't merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." And there is a need to be people who put into action what we learn as we read the Bible. We need to be constantly asking the questions, so what? We need to constantly ask, therefore because I've discovered this about Jesus, I'm going to live this way. So can I ask you, what have you learned from Jesus that you have put into action? I can see you're not used to a two-way conversation. Never mind. I made a little list of things you might have taken up and clung to, to forgive, like he forgave the people who nailed him to the cross. Forgiveness is huge, isn't it? To serve, as he demonstrated when he washed the disciples' feet. He said, "I didn't come to be served. I came to serve, to give my life a ransom for many." I love this one. It really means a lot to me because I don't know how you get on as a Christian, but I fail. I sometimes really, really fail. And, I just remember at those times how Jesus gave Peter a second chance. The story how Peter denied him, but, he still is the main guy at Pentecost, standing up to preach the gospel, leading the church, because, Jesus gave him a second chance. I learned from Jesus to answer a question with a question. He does that with the Pharisees. It's quite a good thing to do because it gives you time to think of the answer to the question they've just asked. What about patience? He's very patient with his disciples, isn't he? They just seem so thick. I really am quite encouraged by them that they don't get it. Again and again, they just don't get it, do they? They don't realise who he is, and they don't understand, even though they're being told quite plainly and demonstrated who he is. They learn so slowly. What about prayer? If the Lord of glory, the Creator God, become a man, had to pray to God the Father. Wow. Verse 29 says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart." Learning from Jesus, who is gentle and humble in heart. You've seen the way he treats people. He's so gentle with people. He's so loving in the way he treats people. Some of you might sort of, one lady in the house group I belong to, when I said that recently, she said, "But what about when he chased all the people out the temple and got angry with them all?" Oh, I said, that was such an act of love. And she said, "What?" And I explained to her that the place where the men in the temple were doing the money changing and selling animals was the court of the Gentiles. It's the only place I would have been able to go in the temple. It's the only place the Ethiopian eunuch could go. And it was so cluttered, they couldn't go. That's why Jesus says, "You've made my house a den of thieves," and it's meant to be. a house of prayer for the nations, because the nations could go into the courts of the Gentiles, but they couldn't go any further because they weren't part of God's chosen people. You know, it's an act of love, isn't it? Clearing the way for us who are not Jews to come in. I am gentle and humble in heart. How? When I left Bible college, I was only 25. I got this job working among seafarers. And that's a long story. I didn't just go pop into it. But I started on the London docks. It was my job to go on board ships and distribute literature, distribute scriptures, get men in conversation, talk about Jesus, befriend people, try to help them. But the main aim was to win them for Christ. And I had a year in London, and I was under a sort of supervisor. It was my sort of probationary year. His name was George Dale. Now, I was 25 and George was over 60. And George was was totally different from me. He was an extremely clever person. And his job was he was an interpreter. His main language was Italian, but he could speak 8 languages fluently. Right, and have a jolly good go at a few more. So going on a ship, lots of ships, have different nationalities on board. So you might have a German coaster, but the crew might be made up of several nationalities. And George would go on board, and he would speak in 3 languages at the same time, and I would be mind-blowing. And he would turn to me and speak in English, so I was in the conversation and all this. I thought, well, I can never do anything like this. So that's not really what I learnt off George. What I learnt off George was you never, ever go anywhere uninvited. See, the doors are open on a ship. You can walk straight in. You go straight in to the living room. You go straight into the dining room. You go straight into a man's private bedroom. You just walk straight in. But George never would. He knocked on every door. And he stood till someone said, "Oh, please come in." And he would go in. And he taught me that if there was a lady in the cabin, I must treat her as if she was the man's wife. That was a very big lesson to learn. And you see, because George was just so humble and so gracious. And I wasn't, by the way, I wasn't. I thought I was quite important. But George brought me down a peg or two. And Jesus says, "Come and learn of me. I'm gentle. I'm humble of heart. Take my yoke upon you." It means consistent sacrificial commitment. I'm with Jesus. I'm under the yoke. I'm going with him. I'm learning from him. My little grandsons, they go to Christ Church School in Morton, primary school. And the younger one, he's 9, end of term assembly at Christ Church this last week. All the children were given what would Jesus do armbands. This is school, by the way. This is mainline school. It might be Church of England, but it's mainline school. And the kids are going home with an armband with the initials on WWJD. What would Jesus do? And it's something we must ask, isn't it? What would Jesus do? As you look at him, what do you love about him? What do you love about him? I love that he's compassionate. But I love more that the compassion of Christ leads to action. I love that because often I see a need and I have compassion, but I walk on by. I walk on by. Jesus doesn't walk on by. He stops. The large crowd is there, and he has compassion on them and he heals their sick. Huge crowd, and, he starts teaching them. On another occasion, a huge crowd, and it says, he has compassion on them, and he feeds them. It's the 4,000, and he feeds them. Does my compassion lead to action? The minister of our church came out of his house is just next door to the church. He just came out, walked round the front of church, and it was an evening time. It was a bit dusk, and there's a lady sitting on the church steps crying. What on earth do you do? He went down there, and he sat next to her on the steps and waited for her to stop crying. And he said, can I help you in any way? I'm the vicar. And she said, well, my husband's dying. She said, your husband's dying? She said, yes. The carers are just looking after him now, the nurses. And she said, I've just had a little opportunity to go for a walk. And she said, so I've been sitting here thinking. And she said, I must admit, I wish the place was open so I could go inside. Well, Matt sat there and he prayed with her, and he got the details of who she was and all that. But because of that incident, he started a bereavement group. He said to me one day, he said, Dave, we've got to have something that lady and anybody in the same boat as her can be invited to, where they'll be able to sit and talk with people and where they'll hear about Jesus. So he started a bereavement group, which I lead. And we've been shocked about how many people we get, by the way, and where they come from. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So rest. You see, when you first read this, you could get a picture of, sitting in a nice comfy armchair with a cup of coffee, reading your favourite book. But I don't think that's what it's about. I don't think that is what this rest is all about. I think this rest is more of being able to be still in the storm, more able to trust in the Lord Jesus in the storm than it is about just doing nothing. It's not that sort of rest. In Philippians 4, Paul talks about his life and his circumstances. And he said, I'll read it to you. It says, I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. So that's something he's learned. He didn't know how to do it. He's learned how to do it. He's learned to be content whatever the situation, right? And he says, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or want. I can do everything through him who gives me strength. I think that's more a description of what Jesus is talking about. This ability to be able to keep going, be able to keep going on the road, even if the road's hard, to have a contentment, a peace that people notice and wonder, how could she possibly be like that because of what's happening to her? Yep, there's a peace that we see in her. Camp was mentioned. One of the people that I've been to camp with is a guy called Mal Wright. Some of you might know him. Mal has a stoma. In other words, he has a hole here, which is crudely how waste comes out of his body. He has a bag hanging here. Now, I've never known anybody, like, we went swimming, and he went swimming, He used to say at camp, if you want someone to go in the water and go to the depth we want the kids to go to and stay all afternoon, I'm your man. Once I get in, I can stay as long. And Mal was just the same, he would just go out there. But he's got this bag hanging off his front. And all the kids would see it. And even when he's dressed, you can see this lump there. And, and camp was on prayer. Yeah, it was an amazing camp. At one point, we asked the kids, if you've got any prayer requests, write them on one of those sticky labels and shove it on the wall. And we'll pray for it after you've all gone. And so when I stood there with the lady padre to pray, I was quite shocked that we had quite a few young people with us praying. And after 2 days, we said to them, if that prayer you wrote and put on that wall's been answered, will you take it off and put it over there? And we were shocked at how many bits of paper went over the other side of the room, It was something very, very different. And Mal stood up, God answers prayer. And he said how people prayed, when he had cancer and he was having this huge operation. And they all prayed that he would be healed. And Mal said, I have to confess to you, I didn't pray that I would be healed. I prayed that God would give me the ability to cope. And he said, you've seen it, haven't you? God answered that prayer. And all the kids are going, yeah, that's right, Mal. Yeah, because they'd seen how well he could cope. I think that's the sort of rest that Jesus is offering. He's offering this ability to cope, the ability to keep going, even though the way is hard. There's a godly contentment to learn from Jesus, a resting place to be with him. Come to me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I'm often burdened, aren't you? What does that mean? It means 2 things. It means that I haven't been to Jesus because his burden is light. If I'm carrying this heavy burden, I need to come to Jesus, don't I? Need to come to him and ask him, I'm on this heavy burden. I need your help, Lord. And then there's another thing. If I'm, as a Christian, carrying a heavy burden, Jesus didn't put it there. Now, that's really important. That's really important because sometimes as Christians, we take on things that the Lord never meant us to take on board. And they weigh us down and they wear us out. And quite frankly, no, Jesus wants us to have his yoke, which is light and easy to carry. He spoke, Jesus, about how the experts of the law, he said, woe to them, for they load people down with burdens they cannot carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. It says in 1 John chapter 5, verse 3, that the Lord's commands are not burdensome. If we're going his way and we're doing what he says, it's not going to be like a terrible burden that's weighing us down and pushing us into the ground. We need to come to the Lord to find that place of rest that he can give. We need to be learning from Jesus. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. So may I ask you, what have you learned from Jesus?